It has taken absolutely no time for New Orleans Saints safety Tyrann Mathieu to show the value of every penny spent in his contract. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints, your team every day.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, Crescent City Sports, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Very glad to be here with you for another episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for joining us in today's episode. We're getting to your questions from the live show from earlier today, following day 14 of New Orleans Saints training camp, including what Trevor Penning has to do to earn a starting role. We're also going to dive into the value of the preseason and which positions and kind of position groups and units benefit from those games the most. But first, Tyrann Mathieu has shown you the absolute value of his addition this offseason every step of the way since he's been on the field over the course of training camp. And I'll tell you what, he's worth every penny. Don't forget that Tyrann Mathieu's contract is not a ridiculous contract at all. It's not even a $10 million per year contract. It's a 3-year, $28.3 million contract. Yes, you heard that right. 28-3. I don't know if the New Orleans Saints knew what they were doing, but I think they knew what they were doing. But regardless, $28.3 million contract. He's got some incentives in there as well, about $1.5 million in performance incentives that he can get, and an additional $500,000, so $500,000 that he can get if he is an all-pro at any point. I don't know if that's $500,000 each year is possible or whatever that looks like. But his sort of incentives all break down to 80% of snaps in a playoff win, and then $500,000 for each additional playoff win as well in 2022, I believe. So he has a potential out in 2024, which means that the New Orleans Saints can get out completely scot-free after the 2023 season. But that does mean that Tyrann Mathieu is effectively a New Orleans Saint for the next 2 seasons. And if you've been out at training camp at all to watch, or if you're a media member or somebody that's gotten the opportunity to be present for all of training camps thus far, you're very happy to know that Tyrann Mathieu is on your team, your favorite team, for the next 2 years. Mathieu has shown over and over again, over the course of training camp, the value that he brings to this team. And I think we oftentimes make the value intangible, right? His leadership, his communication, his ability to read offenses and match patterns, and his guidance and mentorship and all these other things. And while those things aren't untrue and certainly don't lack of value, he's also a very good player on the field as well. And I think that in Thursday's practice, day 14 of practice, you really saw it a few times. I talked about and a lot of people have been talking about sort of the play that he made in coverage against Alvin Kamara. And one of the deadliest things that Alvin Kamara does in the passing game, he runs what are called choice routes or option routes. Those option routes allow him to do any kind of release, really, or operate off of any kind of release. Let's just say something that frees him up through the middle of the offensive line. So he runs a route, comes up the middle of the offensive line, and he's effectively got 3 options. He can cut and go toward the outside. He can cut back in and go towards the weak side, or he can kind of curl around and just sit where he is and be able to, find a spot in the zone for the quarterback. Those are very hard to defend. And we've watched linebacker after linebacker, safety after safety across the NFL have so much trouble defending those routes because you don't really know where Alvin Kamara is going. Alvin Kamara doesn't really know where he's going until he sees how you're defending him, and then he goes the other way. You'll see it sometimes when he goes out to the flats as well, and he comes around the line of scrimmage. Does he sit tight where he is on the outside? Does he break further towards the line of scrimmage, or does he cut back inside on kind of an angle route or something like that, or pivot, right? So there's a lot of opportunity for a guy like Alvin Kamara to just have a lot of freedom there, and the quarterbacks trust him. The offensive coordinator, Pete Carmichael, trusts him. Head coach Dennis Allen, trust him. But the defense, it's really hard to defend that. except for Tyrann Mathieu. Tyrann Mathieu read it incredibly well, keeping his eyes on the hips, watching where Alvin Kamara started to lead himself out of his break, keeping the hips low. Alvin Kamara did everything that he was supposed to do as a natural and very good route runner. We've seen him do it year after year after year since he was drafted in 2017, and we really saw him do it before then too. But when it came to Tyrann Mathieu, too much veteran savvy, right? Just a little bit too much experience, seen a little bit too much out there, and was able to sit there and break with Alvin Kamara, knock the ball away. And he's playing closer to the line of scrimmage than I think a lot of people realize he would be. I think some folks took for granted that the size situation would keep him further away from the line of scrimmage. Tyrann Mathieu's not the tallest player out there, but he's one of the toughest. He's one of the strongest. He's one of the smartest. And so because of that, he's somebody that can play close to the line of scrimmage. He's somebody that can play further away from the line of scrimmage. That's the other place where you really see Tyrann Mathieu's value. Remember, we're talking about a contract that's less than $10 million per year. Less than $10 million per year. The Saints effectively, right? I'm inflating a little bit, but effectively got Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus Maye for what they could have potentially ended up paying on a yearly contract to Marcus Williams. It's a really good place to be, right? Especially when you're getting this kind of production and this type of versatility from Tyrann Mathieu, because he's not just guarding linebackers. He's not just playing that deep safety role. He's blitzing off the edge. He's lining up in the slot. He's matching up with tight ends. He had a fantastic rep. I believe it was just on Wednesday against Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson, who's like easily about half a foot taller than Tyrann Mathieu is and probably has a good 50 pounds on him. No bother. Tyrann Mathieu carried him off the line of scrimmage, made contact with him within 5 yards, and then just took the angle away from the quarterback. Just outstanding play and just smarts, understanding leverage, understanding how, hey, this guy might be bigger than me, but I'm faster and I can get in the way, right? I can do what I have to do. I can put myself between the quarterback and the receiver and make the quarterback look another way. And if you make the quarterback look the other way, 2 reads into his progression, then all of a sudden, Cam Jordan's getting home. David Onyemata is getting home. Marcus Davenport, once he's healthy, he's getting home. Peyton Turner's getting home. Carl Granderson's getting home. These guys, Demario Davis is getting home right up the middle. CJ Gardner-Johnson's coming off the edge. There's so many different ways that ends up impacting the game, and it will never show up on the stat sheet. Not for Tyrann. But does that matter? No. What matters is that you're making that happen. You're playing your role. You're doing enough to open up the opportunity for somebody else to get after the quarterback, to open up the opportunity for somebody else to take advantage of an ill-advised throw because that quarterback had to look one additional read than he had anticipated and therefore rushes the throw and sails it or underthrows it or just makes a bad decision, doesn't see the underneath defender, whatever it might be. Tyrann Mathieu helps all of that happen. And he helps and impacts all of that from several different places. His ability to rush the passer, his ability to cover tight ends, slot defenders, running backs, his ability to cover deep, his ability to serve in the run game, punch balls out, rip at balls as well. These are the things that Tyrann Mathieu brings you in terms of versatility that, you know what? Marcus Maye brings you a little bit too. So even when those guys reverse roles and one of them is playing close to the line of scrimmage and the other one's playing further away, you still get this type of production from these guys. This is a very different safety duo than the very specialized and uniquely formatted safety duo the New Orleans Saints had last year. And Marcus Williams, who was the deep safety, and Malcolm Jenkins, who was the box safety. And that's it. That was the end of that conversation. Outside of every now and then, you were able to put Malcolm Jenkins back there to be split safeties, right? And Malcolm Jenkins just said that last year's defense was the best defense he's ever played for in his entire career. That's only because he didn't play for this one. All right, family, coming up next, let's break down the importance of preseason games and which units on the New Orleans Saints roster will have the most to prove and the most opportunity to prove it. We got all that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline, our exclusive online betting partners, sports wagering partners here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source for all sports wagering information, podcasts, articles, trends, action, all the odds, lines, and props that you could ever look for. They've got you covered over at BetOnline. The New Orleans Saints right now, their standard team win prediction is 8.5. You can go over if you think they're going to win 9 or more games, or under if you think they're going to win 8 or fewer games. But they also have alternate lines as well, 7.5 and 9.5. So if you think the Saints are going to be a 10-win team and you're just locked in on it, much like I am, you might want to go to the alternate lines and make yourself a little bit of extra cash when you get that right by betting on the over on 9.5, which has longer odds than the over on 8.5. See, so many things that you can do to maximize your profits over at BetOnline. And that's just win totals. There's also Coach of the Year, Player of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year, stat lines, NFL Draft. You can already bet on the first overall selection for 2023. You think one of those random quarterbacks is going to shoot up to the top of the chart just like Joe Burrow did a few years ago? Well, you can bet on that as well. You got that and much more over at BetOnline, which you can visit today on your mobile device or laptop, desktop, whatever you use. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we've also got Locked On Pelicans and Locked On LSU here in the great state of Louisiana. So make sure you're checking out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pels and Caroline Fenton over at Locked On LSU. Go Tigers, go Pels. All right, so we got a lot going on here in the city of New Orleans when it comes to sports, state of Louisiana when it comes to sports. But the big thing right now is that Saturday we get some New Orleans Saints football. Yeah, it's preseason. I know it's not a regular season game. I get it. But hey, I'm still excited about it. I'm just excited for football. We get football tonight, Thursday night too. Don't know if I'm going to watch it, but I'm going to enjoy me some preseason New Orleans Saints football on Saturday. The Houston Texans will be live right after that game to kind of break down what it is that we learned, what's going on with the Saints, all of that stuff. So if you want to take part in that, make sure you're coming out to the Locked On Saints YouTube page for it right after. The thing to pay attention to or to keep an eye out on when it comes to the preseason, oftentimes for me, are the trenches, right? We don't really get an opportunity to evaluate the defensive line and the offensive line over the course of training camp unless somebody is absolutely getting shredded, or on defense if they are absolutely obliterating the offensive lineman in front of them. Even one-on-ones. Dennis Allen kind of talked about it a little bit on Thursday afternoon after practice, that even one-on-ones are completely really slighted towards and in favor of the defensive line because there's no threat of the run. You just know you have to get after the passer. So your pass rush plan just clicks in, right? It's like a third down situation every single time, over and over and over again. So it can get a little bit tough for the offensive lineman over on that side. The other piece to that too is that in practice, like, yeah, you might put pads on, but it's still friendly on friendly. You're still protecting one another, right? Still your teammates. You're not trying to hit each other. You're not tackling. It's not live. It's just padded, right? You just got pads on. You're still basically wrapping up and doing all that stuff. So you don't really get a full evaluation of the offensive and defensive line. So I think this preseason game really shows you where there's a lot of value. So I think there's 3 specific places, and we're going to kind of match these up, offense, defense, because they impact each other right away. So offensive line and defensive line is one pairing that really, really gets to benefit from preseason, right? Can you get after the quarterback? How are you really producing in the run game? And when you get there, can you show that you can get there? And when you get there, can you finish? Can you tackle, right? I mean, these guys aren't tackling at all right now because again, these aren't live practices. They're just padded. And so even for the guys that are getting hit, right, running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, like you want those guys to know what it feels like to get hit. But even for the guys that are hitting, like they need to know, they need to get back to tackling. They have to get back to those fundamentals, right? Like wrap up, bring it to the ground, drive through, keep your legs moving, all that stuff, right? So I think there's all of those pieces to where like the offensive and defensive lines get the opportunity to really show, here's the progress that we've made as players, right? So this is going to be a good time to really start to develop an opinion on, who's going to be the starting left tackle, James Hurst or Trevor Penning. We'll do a deeper dive into that here in just a second. But how much further has Cesar Ruiz come along? How much further has Landon Young come along? How healthy is Eric McCoy? How healthy is Andrews Pete? You start to develop those opinions here. And I say start because it's just the first preseason game on Saturday, right? Then you got 2 more preseason games after that. You're Green Bay, Los Angeles, the Chargers. And so you're not going to base all your decisions based upon what you see in one preseason game outside of 5 players, because the Saints will have to cut down from 90 to 85 after that first game. But it's not really a situation where you're going to develop like really stringent, strict, and final decisions on players. But you start to get an early look at them. The other pairing running backs and linebackers for the exact reason that I just said. Running back, what's it like to get tackled again, right? You kind of get reminded of that. Can you hold on to the football? Are you going to put the ball on the ground? All that. Can you catch? And are you hearing footsteps in the passing game when you're catching in the flats, things like that, which can be a little dangerous sometimes. So that's a big part for the running backs, but also can the running backs break those tackles? Can they run through the contact? Can they get yards after contact, right? Now you get an opportunity to show all of that because you don't get to show that in training camp. When a running back gets the ball in training camp, they kind of run through the offensive line and then eventually a whistle is blown and everybody just goes back to their side. It's not really a situation where you get taken to the ground or you have to fight through the contact or anything like that. It's just over. And some players will continue to run and they'll continue to do it as if they're finishing the play and things like that and just get the mental reps of what that's like. But you don't really get to experience it, I imagine, as somebody I've never played running back before. I'd imagine you don't really get to experience that until you get into those game situations, like real game situations. So that's on the way for those running backs. Similarly, on the defensive side, the linebackers, they got to hit. Can you hit? Can you force the ball out? Can you make those tackles? Can you cover in space? Are you able to close in on the quarterback and finish those plays? Can you close in on the running back in the flats and finish those plays? All of that. So the linebackers kind of get the opposite side of that, but equal value in terms of showing what they're able to do on the field. And for the New Orleans Saints, these two positions, running back and linebacker, carry a lot of intrigue. Who's going to be that running back behind Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram? Not just because you need somebody else as a part of that rotation, but because for 6 games potentially in 2022, you might need to know that other running back really, really well and how well they're able to contribute in the passing game and the run game and as pass protectors. Over on the defensive side for the linebackers, you know who your top 3 linebackers are, but who's your depth? I think that Eric Wilson makes the roster, but outside of that, it's kind of a free-for-all with guys like, the 3 that I think make the roster are Demario Davis, Pete Werner, and Caden Ellis. And then I think Eric Wilson makes the roster. But then after that, with guys like Chase Hansen and Andrew Dowell and Zach Bond and Isaiah Pryor and Nephi Sewell, it's kind of a free-for-all for those guys. So we'll see how all of that starts to pan out and get that conversation started after Saturday as well. And in the final unit, that really gets an opportunity to show you what they can do with special teams. I love watching preseason because special teams become some of the most exciting football that you're going to watch the entire season if you pay enough attention to it, particularly coverage units in the kick return game as well as in the punt game. The reason why I say that it's some of the best football you're going to see is because those players are fighting for their NFL lives. The players that are playing special teams, one tackle is all the difference between realizing their dream as NFL players and unemployment. It's that serious for these players. And so I love watching special teams during the preseason because you get to see people play with that kind of intensity. And when you're a team like the New Orleans Saints that always tries to drag the best out of its special teams units, that's exactly the type of, dare I say, desperation or at least motivation you need from the players that are going to be playing in that unit. And in some cases, earning roster spots because of what they do in those game situations. So that's a big deal, the special teams unit as well. So those are the 3 position groups that end up getting the biggest boost with the opportunity that comes with the preseason. But let's kind of focus down a little bit. Trevor Penning in particular. What does he have to do to become a starter? We'll break that down and get to the rest of your questions from this afternoon's live show as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with your questions from this afternoon's live show. Just a quick reminder, we're doing live shows after every training camp that will carry over even when training camps are closed off to the public, of course, but make sure that you're getting all the information that you need from each day of camp. So that will include the joint practices in Green Bay, and then, of course, the training camp days and practice days ahead of the Saints' final preseason game against the Los Angeles Chargers, which gets us right into the regular season right after that, which is kind of nuts. So let's get to your questions from that earlier show. We're going to start off with Ladarian Vessel, who asked, what does Trevor Penning need to do to win the starting job? This is a great question. I think that so much is being made of Trevor Penning as somebody that's getting into fights, which, by the way, he hasn't gotten into fights in quite some time now, that we're forgetting to pay attention to him as a player. I think this happens sometimes. We're all guilty of it, right? Like, what's the big story? All this other stuff. But we have to remember that Trevor Penning is also a really good football player. He's a tenacious football player, but he's also a really good football player. And he hasn't been playing offensive tackle, offensive line for that long. Remember, he's a converted tight end. And I believe he did that while he was at the University of Northern Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. So with that being the case, what Trevor Penning has to show you is that he can maintain fundamentals and he has to get better with his hand placement. So fundamentals in the passing game. So it's going to be about run. It's going to be about pass sets. Is his footwork murky? Is his back pedal, too clunky, anything like that? Like those, or not really back pedal, but coming up from his set, is it too anchoring, all of that? Is it all too murky? There's a lot to watch in terms of all that, but it's going to be about the fundamentals for Trevor Penning, particularly in the passing game. And then his ability to shoot his hands, to punch, his hand usage, hand placement. That's going to be the other things that he himself has said that he has continued to work on. He did mention, and he told me that the game is slowing down for him a little bit, which is good, but it's going to step up another level once he's not playing against people whose motions he understands and who he can anticipate their pass rushing plans because he's been practicing against them for 14 days and all that, like he can with guys like Taco Charlton and Peyton Turner. Now it all kind of changes once he gets in front of Houston. But I think if you can show those things and show your value in the run game can translate to the NFL, then that would put him in the position to be a starter. And I've heard a little bit that maybe the competition between the two isn't as far apart anymore as we thought that it was. But really, the preseason games are going to be the things that are going to tell you about that. Preseason games are also going to tell you about another player that draws a lot of intrigue amongst New Orleans Saints fan. And Flo Ryan asked about him. How is Cesar Ruiz looking? And did you catch anything in terms of how the team is feeling about him? Well, I'll tell you that the team is very, very positive and very optimistic about him. Now, we don't really know, and I can't really say much in terms of how he's looking because, again, just like we mentioned in the previous piece there, that really preseasons where we get a real opportunity to evaluate the offensive line, their efficiency, their cohesion, all of that. So that's where we're really going to get an opportunity to evaluate Cesar Ruiz. But so far, all of the reviews coming back on Cesar Ruiz are positive. And yes, it's teammates and coaches, but still, they don't have to lie if they don't want to. Next, this was a really interesting question from Tyler Thomas. What is something that the Saints are doing now that you think the rest of the NFL will start trying to copy? This is a really good question, Tyler. He referenced a couple of things, the Taysom Hill rule or the whole ignoring of the salary cap. And I think the salary cap one is the easy answer there. We've already seen, you look at guys like Nick Fitzgerald in the past and, I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Baltimore Ravens have all invested in quarterbacks that could potentially even the Carolina Panthers with Tommy Stevens have invested in the recent past in quarterbacks that can do other things, trying to find another Taysom Hill. The fact of the matter is that you ain't going to find another Taysom Hill. There's only one Taysom Hill. They've tried to replicate Alvin Kamara across the league. They tried to replicate the sixth offensive lineman in Senio Calamete across the NFL. They've tried to replicate the big slot across the NFL, the pass-catching tight end across the NFL. There's a lot of stuff the New Orleans Saints were either at the forefront of or at least early with in terms of production from certain places in ways that you're not accustomed to, that you're starting to see it now, that you started to see it across the NFL. So I think that the salary cap approach is one, kind of like what you're seeing in Los Angeles. You're already seeing some of the void years and all that stuff being added on. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been doing it for ages too. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, just like New Orleans Saints, have always taken care of their players. They just push money back to the end of contracts as opposed to the beginning of contracts. But I'll tell you the other one. The other one will be what I would call the star role. This is the role that CJ Gardner-Johnson played when he was at Florida, and that the Saints have kind of, I don't want to say replicated, but they have maximized CJ Gardner-Johnson's versatility from coming from that role in the Florida defense to playing a similar type of role in the NFL in their New Orleans Saints defense. He blitzes, he has some weak side linebacker coverage responsibilities like hanging with tight ends. He has some slot cornerback responsibilities like hanging with slot receivers. He has some safety responsibilities in terms of dropping back in coverage. You're using him as a Sam linebacker type sometimes, or a dime or a nickel linebacker to blitz the passer. There's so many things that you're doing that. You're starting to see it now with Isaiah Simmons over in the Arizona Cardinals defense, where they have literally created what they're calling the star role. So they take the name, they take that system from the Florida Gators that works so incredibly well for CJ Gardner-Johnson. I hope that our Locked On Gators host, Brandon Olson, listens to this, because I know he would be smiling from ear to ear as I talk about it. But just that versatile chess piece that the offense has no idea what to do with. I think that role, if it proves to be successful at all for Isaiah Simmons, who has been, by all intents and purposes, a player that has been massively held back by his system in the Arizona Cardinals. Alex Clancy from Locked On Cardinals will tell you all about it. now actually finally creating an opportunity for him to be the player that he is supposed to be. We'll see if that starts to take off across the NFL as well. And a lot of people might draw that conclusion directly back to their production with Isaiah Simmons, but it all starts with C.J. Gardner-Johnson in New Orleans. St. John Butler, my good friend, asks, which player would most people be surprised to see on your version of the 53-man roster? It's a really, really good question. I think maybe it's linebacker Eric Wilson. I feel like not a lot of people are really talking about him, but honestly, I mean, when you look at the New Orleans Saints defense at that second level right now, players that have a lot of NFL experience are hard to find. Isaiah Pryor, Chase Hansen, Nephi Sewell, these guys are all relatively early on in their careers. Not Eric Wilson, who's got like 6 years of NFL experience. So I think that he would be the one that I would throw on there. And some people might not buy into the fullback as much as I do. So I would have Adam Prentice probably on my 53-man roster still. So maybe that one would be a little surprising for folks too. And finally, we'll go to Tuck Graph to wrap us all up. Are the Saints getting any production from Davenport? How is he looking? Hard to say. Remember, he's just now making progress in his ramp up. So we haven't seen him take a single team drill or anything like that, right? We saw him do some individual drills. He looked really good in those individual drills, cutting corners, violent arms, everything, right? The shoulder surgery doesn't seem to be an issue at all, stuff like that. So he's really, really good. Doesn't look like he was nursing anything at all. And then we've seen him in like walkthroughs, and then, soon we'll see him in pass rush drills, and then eventually we'll see him in 9-on-7s and then 11-on-11s with full team drills. But right now, hard to say that we've seen too much from him because he hasn't been able to be involved as he's still in his process of ramping up, which has been one of the big keywords of camp thus far. All right, y'all. Coming up tomorrow, I'm going to have one more episode for you this week outside before the preseason game. 6 New Orleans Saints that will benefit from their preseason matchup against the Houston Texans. We're going to have 6 players, 3 offensive, 3 defensive. Feel free to give me your list, which you can drop in the comment section on YouTube, or you can send me on Twitter at RossJacksonNola, N-O-L-A. I appreciate y'all, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps, so you can find us every single day here as a part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For your second listen today, make sure you go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Football lineup, Locked On Fantasy Football, Locked On Dynasty as well. Both of those show us top 50 in the Apple Podcast charts when it comes to fantasy sports, so them folks know what they're talking about. So go ahead and get ready for your fantasy football season with Locked On Fantasy Football and Locked On Dynasty Football as well. I appreciate y'all as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day and a part of your routine. Thank you again for saying yes to the show and to me. If there's anything else you need around your New Orleans Saints around these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, N-O-L-A. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.